My name is Raul. I'm from the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya University. Last year is an organizer. And I'm presenting this paper, Power and Resistance in Digital Degrowth, on behalf of myself and my PhD tutors and co-authors, Joan Soler-Adillon and Enric. So, this research is motivated by a bunch of disruptions that are occurring at a global scale in physical and chemical geospheres, an unprecedented biosphere degradation, and not least also to all the social issues that are causing these disruptions in terms of human suffering at individual and also at collective scales. These phenomena that we see in global and local ramifications are basically the externalities, the secondary effects of industrialization all around the planet. So basically, this is like a summary of the paper I presented last year. So very briefly, I want to discuss how the implication of the industrialization in these issues has produced a critique of the industrial constituents in human-computer interaction design. So in a very rough scheme, I can concentrate it in something like that. In order to support the imperative, the logic of imperative growth, the industrial logic, recurrently on the one hand, generates spaces for extraction from where accumulation is produced, while a production-oriented and efficiency-driven design generates further necessities which require further expanding the boundary of the resource pool, right? So we can have this perspective to examine the recursive nature in human-computer interaction. And on the one hand, we find how problems are generated through techno-solutionism. And on the other, an obsession with the user produces new consumers that render these solutions obsolete at the time. And by new consumers, I don't mean like new people, but like in levels of consumerism and so on. So, research has increasingly been conducted to provide alternatives to this industrial paradigm. But however, such alternatives either in a very rough way also, do not manage to escape the industrial logic due to determinism, because they naturalize at least some of these mechanisms that I just highlighted. And a great example of it is like green growth, which is impossible due to planetary limits. Or they do not scale and thus miss the power to generate impact. So this is like a publication, this is not in the paper that I submitted, by Alfonso Matos, which is like a Portuguese student. And in this publication, he points at this contradiction, this chicken-egg sort of like trap. No? And I wonder how critical can we be in our practice, especially, being part of the system, no? Which I think it dialogues with his question. So, in order to find like some ground, instead of like moving towards like planetary collapse through this recurring loop of disruptions and problems that are increasingly difficult to fix because resources actually are running low while problems pile up, the degrowth project actually proposes to move away from this techno-determinist and solutionist paradigm by removing this idea of the techno-fix, you know? So, very briefly, the degrowth is an economic frame that is related to social, political, and ethical concerns and proposals, which very, very briefly are basically to reduce the metabolic throughput, so the consumption and production of material products, to focus on well-being instead of accumulating, and All these are under like planetary eco-social justice, which is basically based on ecofeminism, environmental justice, and so on. But the economic mechanism and infrastructures for such a system are yet to be developed. So the degrowth framework is complemented by specific practices, basically. So maybe you know about some of these concepts, like the commons is basically the vast array of self-provisioning and governance systems of shared resources, while commoning are the social practices of stewardship that a community employs to manage those commons, right? And if we move a little bit more towards like the digital realm, we find here, like for example, the digital commons that for Maya Fuste are something like the online communities which share non-exclusive co-created digital resources. You probably also know about like peer-to-peer architecture. And we also find in this field like what's called commons-based peer production, which is basically like the transferring of these practices and ideas towards like the post like tangible, think about like 3D printers and so on, right? And so as the commons exist by definition outside the binary state market, they struggle permanently against the threat of being enclosed. As the digital commons open new spaces, think about like digital spaces, for example, in order to support non-digital commoning and due to their precarious dependency to the large spaces under the rule of state or market, the commons struggle again against the risk of being appropriated or co-opted. So under these physical limitations for the accumulation, but capitalism starts to become dysfunctional. So like these authors, like for example, De Angelis warns, struggles can be absorbed and become part of this system, co-opted, thus renewing it and sustaining it. And at the same time, Cafensis and Federici warn like something like the danger that commons may be co-opted to provide low-cost forms of reproduction is something we need to sort of like pay attention to. So among the commons-based peer production research community, some of these issues have been detected, and basically their diagnosis is something that a huge scale difference that places the common in a dramatic power imbalance turns this issue into a dependency sort of trap, right? So for example, you have like phenomena like the injection of funds in free open source software projects, like multi-million dollar purchases of these companies, like for example, Red Hat, or the commons pro bono production monetized and exploited by market agents, which is very difficult to, to control. But I want to turn to this author's paper, where they actually like do like a deeper analysis, and what they see is that digital commoners actually recurrently transition through alternative spaces as they eventually get co-opted. So they create new spaces, and eventually they get co-opted, and then they move to new spaces, right? Well, this emergence for them is relying on technological innovation, which is actually fostered by the growth-oriented efficiency ethos promoted by neoliberalism. So there's like a contradiction here. And this generates for them like this perpetuating illusion, a form of false consciousness that it's rooted in cynicism. So I chose this project by Arturo Castro, friend of mine. I don't know if you know open frameworks, but this project of X face tracker was sort of like a released open source, so part of like the digital commons, but was later used, for example, in Snapchat, right? So the origin of the whole like face tracking or face mapping thing was like a commons, but then it got captured actually. So you probably know projects like this. And the anti-list asks, isn't this coevolution between struggle and capital development really inherently with no end? Like, are we getting trapped in this sort of like loop? Can we escape this loop? Okay, in order to sort of like understand better like how this process sort of happens, I found this this paper that is called Technological Dramas by Brian Pfaffenberger. He's like an anthropologist of technology. And in the beginning of the 90s, he developed this framework that is called Technological Dramas to basically find out how myth, ritual, and context interact in a discourse of technological statements and counter-statements. And with this, he wanted to answer like how power and resistance are constructed through the reciprocal and recursive shaping of artifacts and values, which later spread in society. So the stages that he proposes in his paper or in his papers are basically like this, which can occur like linearly, but can also occur in like a different sort of like order, or even like, you know, recurring or looping at some point. Basically, regularization happens when like a design constituency, like an elite, the status quo, creates, appropriates, or modifies a technological artifact in such a way that some of its technical features embody a political aim. So after this, like maybe adjustment or reconstitution or one after the other, what happens is that impact constituencies engage in control and alteration strategies pursuing to counter the effects that regularization creates. Or in the case of reconstitution, which is a little bit more extreme, these impact constituencies, what they try to do is reverse the implications of a technology through appropriation or counter artifacts in order to negate or reverse the political implication of the dominant system, okay? What happens after this? Most of the time, let's say. And here's where like Pfaffenberger, for example, talks about cooptation, you know, about how these sort of like reversing attempts are actually recaptured. In reintegration, the response made by the agents of regularization to the new problematic counter artifacts that were produced in adjustment or reconstitution, in order to gain control over these artifacts by bringing them back into the control and order space of regularization back again, right? Finally, there's like this stage that he talks about that for him is like the stage where the most social penetration of like these political aims happens, and it's designification is when the artifacts, their context and our social behaviors remain, they become taken for granted, routine, and part of the natural attitude of everyday life, right? And I just want to basically, this is like a work in progress, like thinking about like what to do in this sort of like permanent struggle. Like I've been doing tactical media and things like this for a couple of years, and one of the things that shocked me the most a couple of years ago is when Fat Labs, I don't know if you know them, it's a collective from New York where Ivan Roth and all these great artists were involved, Geraldine Juarez and so on. They sort of like stopped their activity and they published this epitaph that I invite you to read. It's on the website of Fat Labs. And basically, it's, for me, it was very shocking, but it was also like very interesting to actually, you know, like find that you're not alone or something like this. And basically it goes like, we who believe the internet could change society, that technology could take other paths than surveillance, centralization, and consumerism, we lost, right? And then it goes a little bit more deeper in why, what to change or not, and so on. But the idea is like, what I'm trying to do is find ways to protect like what we produce as digital commons from this sort of like cynicism that pushes into like, like using more and more technologies without thinking about like the risk that these technologies suppose, because basically these technologies can be used for other things. And just like, if I have 1 minute, this is like my current research is basically like applying this to the use case of like decentralized accounting, where I'm trying to explore, are there any ways to foreclose the cooptation? Can we do like preemptive undesign of certain aspects and so on, so these kind of things don't happen and so on? And I'm trying to use like speculative entanglements to foresee this unanticipated stabilization of such socio-technical entanglements. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Bravo, merci beaucoup.